Hello, I'm Charlie Walcott from Cornell University, and today I'd like to tell you a little bit about bird migration. It's one of the more extraordinary things that birds move from their breeding ground around us here in Ithaca in the spring and summer, and then move all the way down to Florida. Or South America, actually. This is an oriole, and the oriole is a summer resident here in the Ithaca area, and then migrates down to Central America. And here is an animation showing that. This was compiled from all the data collected by amateur ornithologists, by birders, who testify the presence or absence of orioles in their eBird at the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology. The lab then made this animation which shows the extraordinary migration of these birds. But even more remarkable is this bird. This is an Arctic tern. And the Arctic tern breeds all the way from northern New England up into Greenland. And these birds migrate down to Antarctica, where they spend the winter flying back and forth. I used to tell my students that they flew something like 12,000 miles a year. It turns out that I was quite wrong. They fly on the order of 48,000 miles a year in their journeys. This is a bar-tailed godwit. The bar-tailed godwits nest in Alaska and then migrate non-stop down to New Zealand, where they spend the winter. And then in the spring, they don't fly directly back to Alaska, which you might think. They fly over to China and Japan, where they spend a few weeks regaining, feeding, regaining energy, and then take off for Alaska. And you say, why this difference? I really don't know, but I suspect it has to do with the wind, that flying from Alaska to New Zealand, they take advantage of the prevailing winds. And this is very important for a bird. If you fly 30 miles an hour into a 30-mile-an-hour headwind, you make zero progress. But if you fly in the same direction, then it's 30 miles you're flying and 30 miles for the wind. That gives you 60 miles an hour towards your destination. But that's not even perhaps the most remarkable. This is a field in North Haven, Maine. And it is a field actually where Charles Lindbergh used to land his airplane when he visited his in-laws. The field is full of milkweed. And if you look at the milkweed, you find it has these caterpillars. And these caterpillars are of the monarch butterfly. The caterpillars turn into a very pretty chrysalis and then hatch into this wonderful butterfly. These butterflies then take off in the fall and fly all the way down to particular areas in Mexico where they spend the winter in huge flocks on particular trees in these particular areas. Then, in the spring, the butterflies turn around and head north, flying through Texas and places like that. They stop, have a brood, and it's the offspring that continue the journey. So, by the time the butterflies have reached Maine, it's probably 4 generations away from the butterflies that overwintered. So one of the questions that comes to mind, of course, is how do they find their way on these enormous journeys. And the story starts out many years ago with a fellow by the name of Gustav Kramer, who was able to show that starlings in a circular arena could learn the direction to food using the sun. And he showed this because in the right-hand diagram here, you can see that there are little mirrors that are reflecting the sun's direction. And that causes the starlings to change their direction by about 90 degrees, which was the deflection of the sun. And it turns out that a sun compass, as it's called, is common in many kinds of birds, insects, and the like. The bird have an internal clock because, of course, the sun moves. It rises in the east, at noon is about south, and by afternoon, the end of the afternoon, it sets in the west. And so in order to use the sun as a compass, one must have an internal clock. But I just told you that many birds migrate at night. And how do they make out when the sun is obviously not visible? And the answer to that is shown in this diagram. In one of Kramer's graduate students, Franz Sauer, is lying on his back under a cage looking up at a little bird in the migratory season. And what he noticed was that the birds tended to be active in their migratory direction. Unfortunately, he could only do 2 birds at a time, one for him and one for his wife, so his numbers were rather small. And it took a fellow by the name of John Emlyn and his son Steve Emlyn to develop what is now called an Emlyn funnel. And it's a very simple piece of apparatus. It's a cake tin, and the cake tin has a kind of cone made of blotting paper and a screen over the top to make sure that the bird doesn't escape. And then, finally and most importantly, an ink pad down in the bottom so that the bird has little inky feet. And as a result, when the bird is active at night, it leaves a series of inky footprints on the side of the cone, and that tells you what direction the bird was headed. Steve Emlyn here at Cornell worked on indigo buntings. These are a short distance migrant. They go down to the southern US and Mexico, probably not terribly far. And he put them in the Emlyn funnels, and then he persuaded a local planetarium in one of our local high schools to allow him to put the Emlyn funnels with their birds in the planetarium at night. And what he was able to show is shown in this diagram. On the left-hand side is the diagram of what happened under normal conditions. This was obviously a spring migration, so that the birds were headed north, and they mostly are headed in that direction. There are always a few that don't get the message, but mostly they're well oriented. Now, one of the things you can do in a planetarium that you can't do outdoors is to turn the sky around. And so he reversed the projector in the planetarium and put his birds out, and what he found was in the second diagram. And it shows that the majority of birds reversed their direction as the sky was reversed. And finally, what he did was to simply turn off the planetarium and leave the birds alone in the dark of the planetarium, no stars, and what he saw was essentially a random distribution. And so it's clear that at least the indigo buntings were using the stars as a compass. Unfortunately, in Ithaca, there are many days when it's overcast, like this one, for example. And on an overcast day, the birds can't see the sun, and they certainly can't see the stars at night. And so the question is, what do the birds do then? And so we have to move to Germany, and the work of Wolfgang Wiltschko in the basement of the Frankfurt Natural History Museum, where the stars obviously are never visible. And he put European robins in this kind of circular cage, which is surrounded by coils through which he can generate a magnetic field. And what he found was that the birds were somewhat oriented, rather messily oriented, but somewhat oriented in the natural magnetic field. And when he changed the field with those coils, the birds turned around and generally flew in the opposite direction. So now we have three compass systems. We have the sun when it's available, the stars at night, and the Earth's magnetic field. And most people agree that those are the three main compasses that birds use in their orientation. But think of the problem that a bird faces. Imagine that you were out in the middle of a large body of water in a small boat, and I give you a magnetic compass so you know where north, south, east, and west is, but which way do you paddle? And I think you'll agree that you just can't know. You don't know. You need to know something else. You need to know where you are with relation to home. And then you can use the compass to go in that direction. And that process of figuring out where you are with relation to home, we call the map. And we don't mean a Rand McNally map. We simply mean that ability to know the direction to home. And some people have wondered whether birds can do this. And so a group at Princeton University went out and caught some sparrows, some white-crowned sparrows in California, who were in the process of migrating, and brought them to Princeton, and then equipped each one with a little radio transmitter and followed them in an airplane. And what they found was very interesting. The old adult sparrows all headed back to the wintering ground, whereas the young birds didn't head back. They simply continued in the direction that they had been going in California and simply headed south. So it's quite clear then that at least adult birds have this ability to have a map as well as a compass and figure out how it is, what the direction properly is to get home. The question then becomes, of course, well, what is the map based on? How do animals know where they are with relation to home? And that takes us to this bird, which is a homing pigeon, which lives in a loft, and I can take it anywhere up to as much as 1,000 miles away from its loft, let it go, and it returns home. And that is something I have studied for many years, and that will be another story for another time. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope this has been an interesting expedition into how birds migrate.